Hi, and welcome to this video where I will go through how I built a fully autonomous AI podcast about AI news and how it's actually kind of like the second time I built this whole system. And through this, I would like to go through my current approaches to AI engineering and how it has changed. I think have seen many classic computer science videos on how basic computer science and software engineering has been done, but very little like actual walkthroughs about people's thoughts on AI engineering. So I hope you might learn something today. So first, I'm gonna play a section from the podcast, which has my cloned voice, but runs fully autonomous.
Hey, welcome to AI Mornings with Andreas Vig. It's May 1st, 2026. Let's start with some striking numbers out of China. NVIDIA's B300 AI servers are now selling for about 7 million yuan in China. That's roughly $1 million each.
Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that. So that podcast runs every day, each morning, and it requires no human input at all. It just gives me the news each morning, and I made it purely for my own enjoyment. But anybody can go in and listen in. It's on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So before I started this project, I had some like requirements. What I really wanted to get out of this engine. And first, it really needed to run daily, fully unattended. I didn't want it to break down. I didn't want me to confirm anything. It just needs to run. And then cost had a ceiling, but it wasn't anything crazy. I set this $50 amount just for it to not run fully loose, but I can use some heavy token usage on it if I need to. And then it wanted to not just be one source, I wanted to be many sources of AI news, and I wanted also as a bonus to try to do some more open-ended research. If it found an interesting lead, I wanted to try to make a deep dive into that interesting lead. And of course, I needed the script to be quite good and to be like worth listening to. It shouldn't just be some like very badly spoken, just pure read out loud of a new story. It should feel like someone is explaining the news very well to you. Then I want it to be like cross episode aware. I don't want on a week where OpenAI releases, then you might pick up a new release story for GPT 5.5 like each day of the week, and I really wanted it to not have any duplicate stories. And I wanted even more. I really wanted to be like if at the start of the week a new release came and another release came the following week, I wanted to be aware and could make callbacks to, oh, last week OpenAI released, this week Claude released. So the first time I built this setup was a year ago, and back then I built it fully workflow, and then I'm gonna walk you through how this workflow set up. So it had structural scraping, so I defined some sources, and then it with HTML parsing scraped these newsletters and news sites for news. Then it put those stories in a database. Then I had a cheap LLM take each news story and then summarize it with a title and a short description. That way, I could embed the descriptions and the titles to make them to deduplicate, meaning that if a story was already used this week and a new story which had a very similar had a high cosine similarity to that story, then I would say that story was a duplication. Then from all the legal stories from this week, I would have an LLM pick the stories that should be in today's episode. Then I had a writer LLM writing quite expensive LLM write these stories and try to really make a good podcast. I had a reviewer step with an LLM who could make small fixes and tweaks. Because like normally, if especially a year ago, if you had one LLM really focus on doing correct information and making the stories good, then you wanted another LLM who could like kind of fix up on some of the language and some of the like the more podcasty things to it. Then of course you'd have some text to speech and then finally upload. This worked very well. Such a fun project to do, but again, remaking it, I took a whole nother approach. One of the really like annoying thing about this is that you need to keep a very rigorous database structure. You needed like a title, the summary, the embedding, try to you needed to keep track of like which one had been was potential duplicate, and like which story was at the length that it could be a main story, and which one was story that it could be like a quick news story, one of those like small releases, and which podcast that they were in. So at least for me, like making like very rigorous database schemas doesn't really feel super satisfying in the age of AI anymore. And it really lacked this like cross episode awareness. Like duplicates could, if on one day OpenAI launches a new model, and then on day two the benchmark came, then the similarity of those articles might actually be like too similar, so we call it duplicate, and then later we again call it duplicate on like incidents with GPT 5.5. So like even though these are not the same stories, then the math of these embedding models would say that they are, which they really weren't. But you had to set some kind of threshold, and it's like a balancing on a knife's edge to hit that deduplication perfectly. So for the agentic architecture, which the current system is built upon, you have a cron trigger, triggering daily, triggering this agent, which has access to read and write .md files, where it can read the last week's or the earlier this week's podcast scripts and what that research agent found out. It can do web search, go on searching like newest OpenAI models, and it can do page visits. And it also had some loose instructions for what it should do, but the deal with this was that it was fully agentic, so it should just accomplish its task. And then if it needed to do some research, then read earlier week's podcast to make sure this wasn't a duplicate story, it could do that. And if it found a story which it could like feel was kind of a follow-up story, then it could see if we already had that story earlier, so it can make a callback to it. But it read the last day's summaries, it researched sources, also defined sources, and then did some open web scraping. It wrote a report and a summary for the research part, and it picked which candidate should be in today's story, and it wrote the scripts, tried to incorporate the callbacks, and then it outputted to the pipeline, which could then just be workflow again with text to speech, also adding music, and then posting it. So even though the agent kind of did its own workflow, the ability for it to be kind of aware of everything just made the whole process so much easier to engineer, and the quality so much higher. So now here it didn't have a database. It was a simple file system. So made a folder for each day, which had to include 4 files: a research report, everything it researched that day, research summary, just a few lines for each part of the research, the podcast script, which would be sent to the text-to-speech model, and then a podcast summary just of which stories were picked today. That way, the agent could quickly read and try to search through earlier podcasts to find out which stories were mentioned when. So this would allow, if we had a script like this, a new Claude Opus 4.7 finally released, as it was getting teased, as we said last Monday, and we could know that we said something about it last Monday. It scores 57 on artificial analysis, which is 2 points higher than Opus 4.6, which we covered last month. You would be aware that it did something last month with it. So that would be very hard and requires so much over engineering to do in a workflow. At least for me, I would think. So, like, what are the pros and cons? Because it's not just all project doesn't need an agentic approach. I would like to, of course, say that first of all, the workflow is so much cheaper. It doesn't have so much waste with expensive tokens for expensive models. It's much more traceable. You can see why it picked stories, why certain stories were left out, why certain stories hit deduplication, and so on. Each step was much easier to debug, and you could like way better tune that you need cheap models for easy tasks and expensive models for more expensive tasks. You had way higher trust. You knew way better that where the stories came from and that they were actually from not just open research. However, the agentic, which I would ultimately like to recommend for such a project, the free range research is where it could, if it read something interesting in a small news story, it could have the ability to go out and find more about it, try to find the source code and see how, and really deep dive into interesting projects. It was way better at active narrative continuity. It had an idea, an actual semantic idea of what a deduplication story is, and it could also do callbacks to like continuous stories. And also one thing with agentic is that you kind of get like free quality gains with just model improvements. So if a new model comes out, you can just switch the engine to a better model, and you might get improvements on both like getting better research stories and the script feeling more alive. One thing that is probably the most important for this is that it was 10 times faster to build. Building a workflow really requires so much thought to how you want to set everything up, where as an agent, it is just programming in pure English, the prompts. So I hope you learned something from this video. It was like fun to make this project. And maybe if you want to, you can go in and subscribe to the podcast. It's running every day for my sake. So if you want to get your daily espresso shot of AI news, you can do it as well. And thank you for watching.